Hello, welcome back to Said with Courage, where we study systems design in order to solve really wicked, complex problems, especially like suicide prevention and how do we increase excellence, how do we increase the level of excellence in frontline mental health work? That's a question that we're always asking around here. And today I have something pretty special. Griffith University's Centre for Systems Innovation has put out a new report as of June. It's currently June 2023. Shaping Innovation Futures, right? Discovery report. So I figure I'm going to do something that I haven't done before. I'm going to study on camera. I am going to study with you. I'll probably cut and slice this video so that maybe it'll be a montage rather than just watching me read for an hour. But what I'd really like to do over the next year, I'm thinking, is learn how to read scientific reports. I want to learn how to really read data and look and read research reports and understand them. I don't have a formal education beyond 1 year of a psychology degree that I dropped out of almost 10 years ago. So I figure this is a great way to start. So let's do it. I'm going to be taking notes over on the left in this Notion page, and I will probably speak into that a little as we go as well. And I'll be reading the report right here. So let's dive in. I'll be pausing and Alt-Shift-P. Cool. I'll be pausing and pressing record as we go. Cool. So what's so exciting about this in the first place? To frame why systems thinking is so important and what it has to offer, we have to understand the context that we live in. We have had a very slice and dice way of seeing the world for a long time, where we break things up into their tiny little parts, as small as we can understand them. Then we do a lot of study on those tiny little parts, and then we zoom out and we chuck our information together. And it's given us the world that we have now, where our communities are designed in these weird ways that worship squares and boxes. Streets are not safe to be on. Streets belong to the cars, not to people using their bodies. Homes don't face one another in an inviting way. There's no sense of community. Industrial supply chains feed all of us, seed oils and all kinds of things that are bad for our health, giving us all kinds of diseases. And so there's lots of output, there's lots of secondary effects. They're called externalities when we look at systems design, which is basically just unintended side effects. There's lots of externalities that we live with and accept as normal because of this way of seeing the world. And systems thinking gives us a different way of seeing the world. It gives us a new lens where we can see that one person is a whole system of their own, and another person is a whole system of their own, and the parts where they overlap create all kinds of interesting things to study and phenomena. And how do we maximize for the best overlaps? Basically, the overlaps from which create abundance and create generosity and virtue. So, Griffith Centre for Systems Innovation is a systems-focused school close to where I live. Super exciting, because I'm only just getting into this over the past 2 years. So, let's dive in. Uncovering the conditions we need to accelerate regenerative and distributive futures. So we've got the executive summary, introduction, why are we doing this work, our approach, framing the inquiry, discovery, what we learned, evolved attributes of systems initiatives, practices, processes, and inputs that enable systems initiatives to take shape and work, directions to grow systems innovation in and for Australasia, and then appendices and references and acknowledgements, including acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we, our discovery cohort, and the initiatives we interviewed operate on. Initiatives we interviewed operate on. We pay our respects to their elders, past, and present, and we also acknowledge that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples were forcibly removed from their lands and sovereignty was never ceded. Where we recognise their continuing connection to lands, waters, communities, and their deep understanding of complexity and the interconnected nature of the systems we inhabit. That's the first time that I've read that acknowledgement, and that's the best acknowledgement that I've read. That's the best one that I've ever heard, because it's that deep understanding, and not just thinking understanding that we tend to have in our, in the modern world, but an embodied understanding where the way that they lived, right, the way that tribal people lived all over the world was very much in harmony with their surroundings. Super significant. So, executive summary, shaping innovation futures, discovery report. I'm going to read and then I'll pause it, read, and then unpause it and summarize. Alrighty, so this executive summary outlines why we need to focus on systems innovation, as well as what that means from a really 30,000 foot view, with a little bit of like a couple of lists here that are really handy to summarize. For example, all these different system initiatives, they might be really different, but they have lots of common attributes, right? They share lots of stuff in common. They make a bold ambition for future state that we can work towards. They provide lots of spaces and platforms. Okay, so we need to have ways where different people with different interests can come together and share a common space. And obviously that's not just the physical and technological aspect, but that's also the cultural constraints, right? We have to provide the right kind of culture for people to that they do share their intelligence, contribute to rethinking the fundamentals. So lots and lots of different fundamentals have to really shift, because the systems that we live in now were built in the industrial age. The way that we do work, the way that we do leadership management, a lot of it is actually the same thinking from the 50s, from even earlier. Intentionally use a wide range of levers to incentivize, enable, and sustain multiple innovations. So it really is about innovation isn't just about like, okay, how do we fix this one thing? It's about how do we look at this entire system and create multiple angles, a systematic level of thinking for a whole system's change. So that means, say for example, you had a school that you wanted to shift their culture. You might have one angle is for how the culture is going to be with the P&C, right? So that'll be one angle that's really important. Whether that's an influence campaign, right? Because maybe the wrong culture has taken root. At the same time, you might want to have you want to have other initiatives in the school. So maybe the canteen for the teachers needs to be updated because people have been talking about how hot it is and the aircon's doesn't work and things like that. So there's that technology aspect where we're going to have to, but then there's also the feedback. We're going to want to really listen to those teachers and find out what is it that's bothering them about their work environment and how can we make their lives better. Great. So then we'll have the the aircon needs to be shifted. Maybe they need to even expand the canteen. Perhaps it's not big enough. And what about the staff at the canteen? And what about the environment? The environment around the school. What about the local council? So we really do want to look at the school not just as one thing with all these little tiny parts that are all kind of separate from one another, where we just focus on the one thing. Because what often happens with system innovation is that, with non-system level innovation, is that if we focus on the one part, we pour our energy into it, it increases problems elsewhere. And that's not a problem, that's a feature. So whereas the way that we've been thinking in the industrial age is, okay, we solve that problem, great. Now there's other problems everywhere. All right, well now let's move over to that problem and solve that one. But in this next period of history, we really have to start thinking more broadly and in more depth about the entire system while we're making changes. Because there's no reason we can't have the level of systems awareness so that when we do make a change here, we have already got other departments and other safety nets and other parameters in place, so that not only are the other changes that are going to happen, not only are they are we prepared for them, but we can they can make a positive impact because of our state of mind about how we frame those problems. If we know that staff dissatisfaction is going to ramp right up when a new budget is released, for example, but we already have the conditions in place to capture that dissatisfaction and formalize it into productive suggestions and solutions, how good that's going to be to all of that energy that we can already be assured is going to be kicked up, and the frustrations that are going to be kicked up. If we have the right thinking in place, we've got a feedback mechanism that works. We've got the safety mechanisms before the feedback mechanisms, so that we can increase the capacity for people to speak up and capture that and put that where it belongs, to the right person, to the right committees, to the right decision makers. Maybe even with the co-design process, where the staff get to design some of the solutions that they're coming up with. It's just a matter of thinking differently, basically. So systems innovation is a holistic way of looking at whatever system that we're looking at and really asking, how do we rethink the fundamentals? How do we create the right incentives that sustain multiple innovations? And how do we establish and maintain mechanisms that enable coherence? Right, so still recording? Yeah. So coherence, basically unity, right? How do we have stuff happening with one another so that innovation can happen here and the rest of the system can come along with that innovation, as opposed to, all this innovation happening here and then it creates ripples that make disharmony. Cool. So diverse context but common attributes, right? Handy list number 1 over here, and then handy list number 2, also common practices and needs. So systems, readiness and self-organization, processing of instigation, developing core infrastructures, linking and nesting, and accessing appropriate resources. So these are the practices of how do you actually do this work. Like what angle is important. Developing social capital understanding and visualizing the system. taking time to organize and deliberate, and finding a shared language that encourages and aligns participation. So it's stuff like this which really simplifies the capacity of each different person to be able to contribute. If you've got the system, if you've got something really complex like a whole school, for example, there's like all these different, you've got the local government, you've got the, some income is going to come from state, some income might come from fed, you've got the curriculum that's decided by the Board of Education, you've got the, all these multiple different factors, the socioeconomics of the area, right, of who's going to the school, and where do these, and what about the teachers, the socioeconomics of the teachers, and how do they feel at this school, and so there's all these different factors. The more that you can simplify some kind of a visual, or simplify the representation of the system, so that you have like a map, like a clear map of the different dimensions and actors, and the more that you can visualize it and simplify it, then the easier it is for everybody to participate. You don't need it's not just the people who can hold like really long, dense amounts of text in their mind at once to be able, you can just look at something and say, oh yeah, I can see that, and well, what about if we tried that, right? And that way you lower the barrier to entry and increase the level of participation. There's a process of instigation, right? So people have to initiate the collection. You have to initiate like the gathering for proper innovation, for the collaborative mindset. Developing the core infrastructures. So what is the governance structures around how we organize? What are the best ways for us to create knowledge, to share, our learnings? Linking and nesting. So if you do have a innovation team, then how do they fit into the wider context? How does the team themselves fit into the wider context? We have to make sure that, for example, the leadership, so in this case, the leadership would be the board of directors if it was a private school, or the, I forget what they're called now, the office, the principal's level. There would have to be someone from the principal level who has engagement with the innovation team, as well as people from the student body would have to be involved as well, right? Maybe the student council would need input. And of course, there's the funding. So we've got to have resources, right, in order to run this kind of thing. So pause and continue soon. Regenerative and distributive futures. How can we create conditions for regenerative and distributive futures? Really, really big question right here. I'm very interested in permaculture and the way that we treat water and the way that we treat resources. And the fact of society is we can regenerate water. Water is a renewable resource. The way that we treat water is as though it's a non-renewable resource. And what happens is, because we treat water this way, we take it up out of the land, we empty the water tables of that water, and we siphon it off and use it elsewhere. Not thinking about the longer, wider, broader context of the system upon which that water exists. But the way that water tables work is that they can be refilled. The only thing that it takes to refill water tables underground is to slow the rain down when it comes. if we just slow down the rain, it will sink into the ground. But what happens is when we destroy the water table beneath the ground, which is basically, you can think of it like it's like an aquifer, it's like a big body of water, it's like a big pool basically. When we suck that dry, what happens is the water stops nourishing the land on top. Because the water stops nourishing the land on top, then there's much less root systems digging into the ground for the water to follow. There's much less soil to break and soak the water that acts like a sponge. The harder and the drier that water becomes, the quicker the water flows over the top of it. And what happens is we create this feedback loop where less water in the water table means less water sinks into the water table. So we can actually redesign the way that we think about land and the way that we think about how we design land, so that it is in harmony with the basic biology of our ecosystem. That's why this is such an important question. How can we create the conditions for regenerative and distributive futures? Distributive, I'll admit I don't have much meaning to make out of that yet, so update it as we go. This one's really cool. This one's very cool. The use of the term infrastructures is deliberate. It's referring to the innovation infrastructures we've got to put in place to support systems innovation. The use of the term infrastructures is deliberate in the same way we commonly understand the importance of providing infrastructures for essential services, energy, mobility, water, and waste. We believe the same lens and scale needs to be applied to mobilizing human agency, creativity, and cooperation. That's a really fun idea. This graphic right here shows really clearly what the problem is. The rate of change needed to avert crisis is this one here. Right? So we've got change against time, and we need to change rapidly in order to avert crisis. The rate at which institutions change is over here. It's very slow. The rate at which technology changes is over here. It's fast, but it's probably not fast enough. But then the problem is the change of technology can actually make crisis come even faster. The rate of change of technology, because it changes so fast for technology, it can create crises that we haven't really foreseen. So yeah, this little graphic right here just perfectly shows exactly why this is important. Cool, so here's info about how exactly they approached this work, looking first at the way that all different approaches to systems dynamics and systems innovation, there's lots of different philosophies and different ways of going about it. However, there are, of course, common attributes and therefore transferable learnings. So they focused on the stuff that was in common first, and then got together a bunch of different people. There's a heap of different partner organizations looks like from Australia and New Zealand, and then they made a group of people. I wish I was on this panel. Far out. I'm gonna find some names. Honestly, that's really cool. They got together a bunch of different people from different industries, and put them together to really work out how do they do systems innovation together, learn from one another, and then they also got input, it looks like, from some international comparable organizations, so a bunch of universities around the world and stuff like that. Alrighty, so framing the inquiry. Next, we have the clock over here on the left and the cloud over here on the right. What we're looking at here, the clock versus the cloud, is looking at a complicated challenge, is the clock, versus a complex challenge, which is the cloud. So, just a bit of background for you. Clouds are often used to represent the end of the system that we're observing when we're doing system work. Why a cloud? Because it is a pretty accurate representation of the fact that it's complex. A cloud is really a complex phenomena of all these different kinds of factors that are contributing to its existence. And when we're looking at any system, there comes a point where we simply must draw a boundary and stop looking deeper and further at the influencing factors. Say, for example, go back to that school example that we were talking about earlier. We can't be looking at, if we're really wanting to influence this school, the structure of this school, and the well-being of its students, we can't be looking at the single contents of everybody's refrigerator at home. Okay, it's too much information. We can't be looking at all of the aggregate of the websites that all of the students are surfing, or the TikTok videos that they're watching. There's just too much information, so we draw the boundary of the system that we're observing with a cloud. And that's a pretty accurate representation because they don't end. That's the point. It's not that the system finishes of, there's a boundary around the school and therefore that's that. No, like the system will continue further into the world because no systems are separate. All systems are interconnected. So on the very opposite side of that, we have a clock, and that's a really strong representation of the opposite frame of mind. Rather than looking at a complex thing such as a cloud, which is really challenging to, there's many factors that go into the formation of a cloud, as opposed to looking at a clock, it's very, very straightforward. If very few people are going to, without getting into like quantum mechanics, it's just really straightforward. You look at the clock, you know what the time is, you know what the task. You've got a time-bound task, and the way that we think about complicated challenges is with this clock mindset, typically, and that's what we spoke about earlier, so I won't get into the details again, but I'll just read these out. Targeted solutions to address urgent, localized, time-bound needs. Okay, so these targeted solutions, closer toward the cloud is solutions at scale to address a widespread need in a sustained way, right? So, for example, solution at scale to address widespread need. Water is a perfect example. We suck it up out of here, we build a pipeline and the infrastructure so that we can spread it all throughout these other farms everywhere. System innovation to disrupt a problematic pattern or amplify a positive one. Now, this kind of thing, system innovation might be, okay, well, instead of sucking all the water up out of one place and spreading it all throughout the different farms, how are we going to capture and hold and regenerate the water on every farm? How can we have a decentralized way of water, I don't know what you would even call that, water management, so that every farm doesn't have to rely on the entire infrastructure chain in order to feed its crops? It can do that without relying on that infrastructure, right? So that's system innovation versus system transformation. to improve the health of a system by affecting its web or underlying patterns, narratives, power relationships, norms, etc. Now, this system transformation, you can probably guess who wouldn't want you to do exactly what I just described, right? There are big industries built on sharing water, right? On spreading water around. Those industries are not going to be happy about a massive disruption. So we need the transformation, we need the system transformation. That means that we've got to have levels of government involved, levels of citizenry involved, discussions being held being held by the policymakers, by the influencers, the culture setters, and that's where it takes place on a on a holistic level. That's where the transformation can take place. It's so exciting. This stuff is so exciting. I can't even believe it. All right, so this section right here, I'm just going to read this quote because it is gold. Systems don't get solved. At best, we hope to shift systems to a healthier state. Systems don't just need things fixed. They need the healing of relationships, historic inequalities, destructive patterns, and the environment. Systems are infinite. There is no finish line that can be crossed in days or even a few years. Maintaining healthy systems is an ongoing task. Damage can be done when we try to fix what needs to be healed or think we can solve that which is unsolvable. Rather, we must apply the appropriate approach to the type of problem being addressed. This is fundamentally, that is the paradigm shift that systems innovation is bringing. I'm here for it. I'm so excited. I think I might have to call it there and do my day. So this is video 1 of, at this rate, how many is it going to be? 2, 3, 4, maybe 4 or 5. I hope that you find this as fascinating and exciting as I do. If you do, let me know. Reach out over the DMs, put a comment down below, whatever works for you. I write about suicide prevention as a complex system, as a wicked problem, and I study systems thinking and systems design so that we can try and approach this problem and put the state of our social systems into a more harmony, basically, and do something about suicide. So if that's your vibe, right now I write at the frontline level, so for people who are interested in learning suicide prevention skills themselves and how to kind of take it to the next step, to go from beginner to intermediate, or intermediate to advanced, or advanced to expert, or expert to back to beginner, basically. So wherever you are, if you're interested in that kind of thing, hit me up, let me know, hit up my blog, Said With Courage. And yeah, in the future, of course, I'm really keen to do more system design work, whether that means building communities, whether that means talking to policymakers, all that kind of stuff. I'm obsessed. So yeah, let me know if I can help you on your journey. My DMs are open. Link for my things down below. Next time we get together, we'll take it up on page 19. See you soon.